Hello, good afternoon, everyone. This is a continuation of our integrity talks. And this afternoon, we're very pleased to have Professor Lejla Turcilo, who is the professor at the University of Sarajevo, Faculty of Political Science. And Lejla is the head of the communications department at the faculty. We're very pleased we have Lejla with us today. And our topic for today, main topic for today's integrity talks, is the issue of hate speech, violence in public speech, and increasing trends. What it seems to us that the public speech is becoming more brutal, more violent, and we have an expert here with us to discuss these issues today. So hello, Professor Turčilo. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk with us today.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts with your audience.
Thank you. A number of sociologists and media analysts seems to be noticing a trend in the region of Southeastern Europe, a trend that public space is becoming more brutal, if you will. We also notice increased violence and less decent and civilized public discourse. Would you agree with us? And if yes, why do you think that is the case?
Well, first of all, I would say that we are sort of witnessing all over Europe and especially in the region this new form of contamination of the public space with various forms of not only direct hate speech, but more, so to say, subtle forms of discrimination, speech which is indecent to a certain extent. And it's, I would say, a bit of a play along the line of hate speech, but not but those actors who are doing that are very careful not to cross that line, so that they are not they're not accused of promoting and spreading the hate speech, but still to spread defamations, to spread bad talks, if you want, and so on. So why is that the case? I would say there are several reasons to that. We can see that some of the reasons are, of course, political, because this indecent discourse actually fuels the rise of the right-wing populism, as well as some other very extremist ideas worldwide. On one hand, on the other hand, we have had in the previous several years sort of an explosion of specific platforms where very different forms of communication can be obtained. And that's the main reason now everyone has a channel of his or her own to spread whatever he or she wants. And not so rarely, that's unfortunately a bad discourse in general. So along with political reasons, these communication reasons, also I would say that we are witnessing a very low level of communication literacy, so to say, media literacy, political literacy, which are all new terms that are describing this lack of decent knowledge on what quality public communication should be.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. Where would you say are the boundaries? Where does one say that the freedom of speech ends, and what could we define as you said, indecent communication, or maybe aggressive, or inappropriate communication in public space?
Well, yeah, very often that's sort of a logical and very intentional mistake coming from those who spread either hate speech or any other form of indecent communication, that that's their right, that according to the idea of free speech, everyone is entitled to any kind of speech in the public space, which is of course wrong. And we must discuss that very openly, discussing how to prevent hate speech and how to increase the level of decency in public communication is absolutely not the discussion on limiting free speech. the starting point for every democratic society, of course, is a freedom of speech, but that does not mean that the freedom of speech guarantees the anarchy in which someone's lives, someone's families, someone's anything that's important to someone should be at stake or should be compromised by those who are trying to make this terrible talks about certain people, certain groups, certain ideas, and so on. Put in a simple words, free speech ends where someone's speech actually makes someone else at jeopardy, or his or her life at stake. You cannot invite someone to kill somebody. You cannot call someone different names. You cannot offend someone. That's one thing. And completely another different thing, which is deeply in the essence of free speech, is argumented discussion. So there is a clear debate between the argumented discussion in the public space, which should be civilized, which should be based on arguments, which should be based on exchange of different opinions, and that's what freedom of speech actually means, or actually is. On the other hand, there is this indecent discussions that lead to either hate speech or sometimes even crimes based on hate, and that's where the freedom of speech is not something that's all about. It's not about the freedom of speech there. It's about trying to put someone at stake in a way. So that's a clear distinction we should make, because very often, as I said, somehow in the public debate on what the free speech is, there is this kind of tendency to say, yeah, that's whatever you want. And I mean, it's not like any other democratic value. It's not unlimited. It's not meant to prevent anarchy, to make anarchy, to provoke anarchy. It's basically to guarantee people that they are entitled to their views and ideas and opinions, but those views, ideas, and opinions should not jeopardize anyone else, his or her views, ideas, and opinions. Civilized debate is not about that.
Thank you. Thank you. My next question is pretty linked to what you just spoke about, but going to a slightly different dimension. Would you agree with some that we seem to be witnessing this process of normalization of this indecent communication in the public sphere? And what can we do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. We are witnessing this situation in which we are kind of lowering the level of our tolerance towards such indecent speech and sometimes even the hate speech, for several reasons. Some of them are linked to the idea that these indecent debates often are, as I said, politically supported and promoted by those who try to use them to achieve some political goals. And those narratives then serve these goals. And that's why sometimes they are tolerated by, for example, political figures in the public space. That's why some of them, for example, in the Western Balkans, use them themselves. On the other hand, as I said, with the low level of media literacy among the general population, we just don't make sure that in our societies, majority of the people, or ordinary people, as we usually say, understands that that's not the freedom of speech and that's not a political debate. That's something totally opposite to it. And in these circumstances, where these kind of indecent communications serve the purpose or serve the cause on one hand, and where the general public does not recognize that, we have the situation where both sides sort of say accept it as something that's simply there and cannot be changed, and there's no need to change it, or no need for a different approach in general. And that it's very complicated to describe or prescribe some kind of simple solution. This is a process, of course. And it's always important to mention this idea that indecent speech, especially hate speech, is something that should not be tolerated in the society. I mean, sometimes for the hate speech situation is a bit easier, so to say, because as a societies that value democratic values, we can say, well, there is a zero tolerance to hate speech, and we would prevent it by all means, and we will punish those who spread it, because it leads to crimes, it leads to instability of the societies, it leads to atrocities, as we witnessed in the 1990s in the region. So that's sometimes even we can say that there is some sort of a consensus, not a clear one, but still that goes into that direction. But with these indecent speeches, such as defamation, for example, it also became a sort of a manner among political figures in the region to, put a finger on something, to blame someone on certain issues, to promote ideas that are completely indecent, intolerable in any modern societies. And we just simply say, well, it's Balkans. It should not be that way. We should not accept the fact, or accept as a fact, that in the Balkans, with the tradition of our atrocities for many years, we should continue doing that in the future. Because, I mean, like with the wars, should we just now say like, yeah, it's the Balkans, we have wars all the time, so let's do it again? Of course not. I mean, that's how it is with the public communication as well. We should not accept that it's part of our identity, because it's not, and it shouldn't be. It's a narrative which is also imposed to us, that it's some kind of Balkans manner of public communication. There is no specific European American Balkans manner of public communication or decent communication. There are ground rules that should not be neglected or ignored in any society, and our role, when I say our, I mean both public figures, both us in academia and so on, is to actually raise the level of public communication, rather than saying to people, that's how we do it here in the Balkans, because it's not, and it shouldn't be how we do it.
Thank you very much for that. If we go one step further, and that has been my dilemma, what would be what we refer to as hate speech? How do we define hate speech? And what is the actual difference between hate speech and indecent communication in public sphere?
Well, that's an issue that's highly debated worldwide, and in the context of the European Union as well, not only in the Balkans. What we're trying to do is actually what the more developed societies are trying to do as well, is to very precisely define the hate speech, so that it can be prevented, but also in order to make it very distinct from other forms of public communication, and in a way to be able to prevent the hate speech while preserving the public right to free speech. So a clear and precise definition on some kind of consensus is what we need in general. So far, we have this definition goes in a direction that the biggest difference between indecent communication and hate speech is the intention itself. So the hate speech is not only harsh by its expression in comparison to other forms of indecent communication, such as I already mentioned, for example, defamation, where you say bad words about someone without any arguments. And that's one thing. But on the other hand, if your intention is to provoke violence towards that person or group of people, then it's a hate speech. If your intention is to provoke violence in the society, that's again the hate speech. If your intention is to go into direction of jeopardizing or neglecting someone's rights, that's also a hate speech. And very often, all our research on hate speech in the region show that it is always aimed at either individuals or groups that are mostly vulnerable. These are who are already in some kind of a difficult position and difficult situation in our societies. Those who cannot so easily defend themselves from the hate speech. That's also an important thing to mention, because somehow as those who spread the hate speech target those who will not oppose them so openly, or who will not be able to defend themselves so easily. That makes them easy targets, and that's how this hate speech is then promoted towards them or aimed at them, with the intention that the whole society accepts these individuals or these groups as enemies, as those who don't deserve their rights, as those who should not be tolerated in the societies. In that way, the intention is very important. It's not that the hate speech is spread just because you have certain frustration and you put it online on social networks. No, it's mostly planned activity to deprive some individuals or groups from their rights by making them look like, to say it easily, they look like a bad guys in the society. That's what, for example, all minorities are facing, including, for example, LGBT population. There is sort of a demonization of such groups. There's sort of a idea that it's not something that we should accept and tolerate. It's not something that we should, think of as normal or as usual in our society. So the idea, the intention is to make these individuals and groups unacceptable, intolerable in the society, which then makes them an easy target for any kind of violence. Because once you deprive them from their rights and from their humanity, so to say, then it's sort of a justification for whatever you do to them afterwards. That's how hate speech leads to crimes against certain individuals and groups, and that's why it is so dangerous in societies, and that's why it is so important to be prevented. Not only because we want to be polite people to show our democratic values in the public communication, but to prevent more bad things that are happening as a consequence of hate speech as a planned activity.
Thank you very much. You said you now in a way answered what was supposed to be my following question, but let's go a little bit back to this issue. Who are the victims? Who are the most vulnerable groups? And who are the perpetrators of hate speech in our societies?
Well, there are several kind of levels on which we can discuss that. The most often cases, according to our researches, are the cases of hate speech against any kind of minority, including ethnic minorities in our societies, who are presented as so different that they should not be here at all. That's first group. On the other hand, not only ethnic minorities, but all other people who are different in a way, or who are not in, who don't belong to mainstream, so to say. These are like, for example, as I already said, LGBT groups. These are like some very often women, especially if they are present in public life in any possible way. That has a lot to do with the high level of traditionalism in our societies, and this idea that women belong in house to be mothers and housewives rather than public figures. So the fact that they dare to become a public figures provokes this hate speech towards them. Also, we have different people with disabilities very often, unfortunately, who are presented as those who also should not be in the public space, whose issues and problems should not be visible because they kind of spoil the whole situation there, which is, of course, as you can see, these all ideas towards these groups are not only unacceptable, but we could recognize them in the past as something that led to atrocities towards those groups. Very often these are like migrants in nowadays, who are here to steal something from us, who should be expelled or exterminated because they are making us making our lives difficult and so on. So a lot of individuals and groups who are by any way different from the mainstream are very often subject of hate speech. And also that's an important thing to say, because the hate speech is not only present in society in general, but in the political life throughout the region. That's very often the subject or victims or target groups of the hate speech are political opponents, dissidents, those who dare to speak differently from the mainstream, and especially differently from the nationalistic narratives that are promoted, because the hate speech is always a tool of nationalistic narratives. It's a way how nationalistic narratives actually are used to serve as a political tool as well. So who is doing that? Not only individuals who are by accident present in public space just because they have the computer and the internet, but also, which is more important to mention, to discuss, and try to solve, more importantly, these are often representatives of certain political groups, sometimes even public figures, and so on. And unfortunately, I must say that very often, and my colleagues who are more in the field of humanities and who do research on, for example, schooling system in the region, they also witness that there are a lot of examples of indecent communication and some less examples of hate speech, even in our textbooks for students, and so on, where this sort of indoctrination is present rather than scientific facts that students should learn and discuss. So these are very important issues, because, and I think it's very important to have in mind that the hate speech does not happen by accident, that it's always part of a bigger plan to make someone, a group, or an individual unacceptable and intolerable, and that in that way we should address it in general, not only as because we are we have low level of media literacy, this is how our people communicate, but rather because of this part of the very often political agenda, we should address it as such.
Okay. And my next question is very linked to what you were just discussing and explaining, and that would be who is responsible for hate speech and increased violence in public communication, and what would be the role of the political elite? What would be also the role of the media to either decrease, we cannot say put an end, but move the trends towards a healthier dimension?
Well, I would say that we are all responsible. I wouldn't, blame it on certain group or certain I don't know, level of or part of our society. If we are not, of course, we are not all responsible for the promotion of hate speech. We don't use it. We don't all use it, of course, but we are all responsible on developing strategies to prevent it. Because, as I said, it's a process. It's not something that will happen overnight. It's not gonna get to an end very soon, unfortunately, not only in the region, but in worldwide. We can see examples of the rising level of indecent communication and hate speech worldwide. So there are different levels of our responsibility, I would say, starting from families, where this idea of not only media and information literacy should be promoted, but also the idea that your rights and where they jeopardize someone else's rights. It's something that your parents should teach you, how to be nice and decent to certain to other individuals, how not to jeopardize someone by your offensive words and your harsh narratives. Then going to schools, to educational system, where all of us, starting from the elementary level to the level of academia where I work, for example, should promote the tolerance in public communication and discuss the prevention of hate speech with young people, especially in the situation of such a rising influence of the online media, social networks, influencers, YouTubers, and other public figures that we didn't know before, which didn't exist before. So we have to discuss with these young people at all levels of their education what the free speech is and how they should fight for it, but also how they should fight to prevent the hate speech and indecent communication. Then again, we in all public discourse, media have a very important role, because first of all, not to base their programs and their content only on clash of certain individuals, because nowadays we see this trend that very often media kind of also count on that provocative speech, indecent communication, because that makes, in some of their views, makes the program more interesting. That's unacceptable. The harsh words, the public debate, which is not based on arguments but on fighting, is not something that should be in the media as a tool to raise your number of your viewers or readers or clicks. So sensationalism, tabloidization in media, which we are witnessing and seeing all the time, is something that should also be discussed as part of the problem of this low level of decent communication in our societies. And also media should debate this issue more often. And the same way we are discussing this issue today, they should, the mainstream media, especially public broadcasters, should discuss it in their programs, and sending the very clear message that it's something that should not be tolerated in democratic societies. Decision makers, of course, their role is very important, as well as all public figures who should be more aware of their public responsibility. Whenever someone invites you to a public debate, either in the media or online, or I don't know, in a square where you talk to people as a candidate for a political position who is in the streets talking to his potential voters, that's where your responsibility for decency of public communication starts. That as soon as you close your door of your private apartment or a house, you're in the public space, and you should be aware that your words mean something there. So it's not only about preventing the worst cases of hate speech, but building the level of quality communication in society, in the public space in general, because one prevents the other. That's the general idea.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these inspiring words. We don't have time today, because I would assume that we could talk about this for days, to go to every single media and analyze it. But let's chat. Let's find some time to discuss online sphere in the region of Southeastern Europe. How would you define online sphere? How much is it contaminated with hate speech? Can we define difference between Facebook, which seems to be the most popular social media in our region, or, for example, Twitter, Instagram, also in terms of indecency when it comes to communication?
Well, when it comes to online communication, we can say that there are two types of online communication. And of course, the theory also defines it that way. One is based on what we used to call Web 1.0, which would be like websites of different media outlets, for example, web portals, for example. That's very often discussed as the most problematic area when it comes to hate speech, not the web portals themselves, but comments to the articles published on different web portals. That's one part of the problem. The other one is, of course, Web 2.0, which is social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, which is becoming more and more popular nowadays, YouTube, which is very important communication channel now. Another part of the story. I would say that, yeah, in the region, I would say that Facebook and Twitter are the most popular tools for the communication of sort of middle-aged users. Younger users are now more on Instagram, on TikTok, and on YouTube, where that's sort of their niche. So kids starting from I don't know, 13 up till 18 years old consider Facebook and Twitter sort of a dinosaur for their parents and grandparents, and they are not there that often. And I would say that the harsh communication does happen on Facebook, and nowadays in the recent year or two on Twitter as well, because Twitter is becoming very popular tool for the political debate. A lot of political figures publish their thoughts and their ideas on Twitter, and that provokes a lot of debates there. So yeah, in online sphere, I would say the most problematic are the comments on web portals, comments article on web portals, where you can really find, I mean, so many cases and examples of not only hate speech, but very, very harsh communication. And on one hand, and on the other hand, Facebook definitely, where you can also find a lot of examples of not only hate speech, but also these examples of indecent communications, and then very often sort of a very harsh campaigns against certain individuals or groups. So these are two spheres where we should pay more attention to public decency or communication, which would be acceptable and democratic.
Mm-hmm. All right. There is another trend that you could tell us something about, the trend of conscious, planned spreading of hate speech through online media, through social media, the phenomenon of bots and astroturfing, if I'm using the right terminology.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is kind of, that's one of the reasons why I said that we should not discuss the hate speech as only something that happens unintentionally, not planned, and so on. It's part very often of very planned campaigning against certain individuals, certain groups, or certain even institutions, sometimes like organizations and so on. How does it work? Since we all are aware that there is so many different, for example, web portals nowadays, online, available online. Some of them are, for example, open just with the purpose to start a campaign against someone. So how does it work? You pay a small amount of money, you open a no-name web portal, something which is called, I don't know, Lejla.com, whatever. Then you publish an article full of lies against an individual or some group. For example, if you write that Lejla is an idiot which promotes I don't know, fascistic ideas or whatever, without any argument to put into it, with a clear intention to harm certain individual or certain group. And then you pay people to spread that article online in different groups, on Facebook, on Twitter, and so it goes viral, as if it was from the very reliable source, as if it was an article full of arguments rather than hate speech. And once that goes online and becomes viral, people tend not to ask themselves, is it true? That's how these individuals or group are becoming target of other people, who then put comments on Facebook on them, sharing that article, saying the worst things about that group or that individual, blaming him or them on something without any argument again, inviting others to be violent towards that person. If you meet him in the street, hit him in the head or whatever. Or they then send messages to these people, threatening them, asking them to, leave the country, leave our dear, nice society that you are, jeopardizing, and so on. So in put in simple words, anyone nowadays, unfortunately, if he or she is becoming an opponent to certain political idea, a criminal group or whatever, can wake up in the morning as if not even knowing that he or she has become a victim of such planned activity, and just to open his or her cell phone to see inbox full of threatening messages, defamation, insults, whatever, not even knowing what has happened in the meantime, and then to discover that someone did this whole process, made up something, published it online, had other people to sometimes pay them or sometimes just promise them some kind of favor to spread that word, and then to put a target on someone's face. And that's really something that's happening. It happened to many, for example, journalists in the region who wrote an investigative stories, who wrote stories against specific the nationalistic or political narratives. It does happen very often to women in public space. For example, there are colleagues such as Jovana Gligorijević from Vreme in Serbia, who was victim of such horrible situation in many cases, or colleague Dinko Gruhonjić from Novi Sad, whose recent case of his building being put under the attack, so to say, of these people who just sprayed the harshest words against him and his family just because they saw something online which was total lie against him, his ethnic background and everything, political affiliation and everything else. These are the cases in Serbia and Bosnia. We also had cases of colleagues such as Dragan Bursac and his family who was victim of such situations. Some other colleagues from the academia as well, because their narratives don't support the political narratives and so on. And it does put a lot of pressure on these people. And also it provokes another phenomenon, which we call a shrinking space. This is the way how you make people silent. This is these people who do that. It's very often some either criminal groups or whoever. They count on that you will be scared afterwards, and that you will be very careful what to say next time to spare yourself from the next similar situation in the future. And that's how they tried to silence any dissonant voices in the society. This is the reason why we say this is not something that's happening by accident. It's a plan of making dissonant voices disappear from our societies. And that's why this is a societal problem. It's not a problem of these individuals who are victims. It's a problem of society, because this is something that we should tackle as societies. We should not leave these people to fight their own battles by themselves.
Your last words are leading us naturally to the next question. I read one of your analysis. You said that what we need is a social consensus about these issues. The question would be how and who should devise this strategy, and exactly, and how do we not leave these individuals behind? How are they not left alone?
Well, in this context, I strongly believe that throughout the region, it's the issue of the civil society, of us in the public space in general, because unfortunately, it does happen very often. I'm not saying that all political elites are the same, but it does happen very often that these strategies and these forms of these planned activities against certain individuals and groups are coming from those who are politically in power. So it is up to us in civil society, in media, in academic circles as well, to put a pressure on those political elites to not only stop these trends, but to fight against them and prevent them. It's hard to kind of expect that those who are doing this, which are very often politicians, they should just stop because that's something that's indecent. Yeah, they know it's indecent. They know that it's something that harms other people, but it serves them well, and that's why they do it. So it's up to us in the civil society to show more solidarity, first of all, towards these people, because in our societies, that's something that we should probably say to our audience as well, is that in our society we kind of see the trend that we react only when something happens to us personally, and that's one of the very important things to mention. We should not wait for these things to happen to us and then to react. We should show more solidarity to those who already experience such situation in defending their right to be protected from such situations. And also we need to not to wait that it happens to me. If it doesn't, and then it's not my problem. That's not how the society works. And on the other hand, of course, we should put much more pressure on institutions to find these people who do this. I mean, it's not that difficult in online sphere as well to find those who do this, to track them and to show, to tell them that's not acceptable, and to put them, make them responsible for what they did to certain people. So yeah, institutions of the state should do their job. Once again, to mention, not in order to limit the free speech, but to clear the space for the free speech from these bad trends that we are seeing. And civil society should do much more pressure on the decision makers to make it very clear that this is not acceptable and will not be tolerated in our society, and to be more solidar to these people. Of course, media should provide a lot of space to victims to say their stories, because very often you just learn about these trends either if you are a victim or personally someone who is not. That very often we discuss this in the media as well. So yeah, a lot of us can do a lot of things, but I think that somehow in many cases in the region, we just don't see that things can be changed. And that's one of the consequences of all this that we've been discussing in the past 40 or so minutes. These all indecent communication, hate speech, these strategies and trends of campaigning against someone lead to general apathy. People just feel that in societies as such, they cannot do anything about anything. And that's something we should tell our audience or our people in our societies. They do it, whoever does it, they do it with the purpose to make you believe that you are incapable of deciding on your own in the society where you live. And once the way you fight against all these trends, hate speech, campaigning against individuals and groups, fake news, whatever, is your way of fighting for your right to be a participant in the society and in the life of your society in general. It's not a fight against hate speech just because we should not have the hate speech. It's fight to show that you are entitled to be asked how certain issues should be solved in your society. And as societies, as groups of people, we have a power to make changes. These all bad trends that we've been discussing actually just made us believe that we don't.
Thank you very much. Additional layer of something that you also frequently talk about is cultivating the culture of dialogue. How do we teach young people? This is obviously the area of prevention, but should we teach young people about good quality communication and culture of dialogue?
Well, let me first say how we should not teach them. Very often we hear the idea that it should be one course in elementary schools, high schools, university education, media and information literacy course, and that in this one course, students should be taught on the quality of communication, critical thinking, and so on. I strongly believe that it's not about one course. You cannot teach someone to be a critical user of media and to have skills to understand all these issues in one hour a week. You know, it should be cross-curricular competence that's developed throughout the formal education. So we do teach, we can teach people, especially young people, these things in formal education, but also in families, but also through media as well. One of the things we should bear in mind is that these young people are online all the time. So online platforms can be used for the media, promotion of media and information literacy very much. And we also can teach young people that it is important to fight for their right to free information and free speech, to fight for their right to express their views and ideas, but also to fight for their right to be spared from these bad situations that can happen, such as hate speech and other forms of indecent communication. So we have to sort of informal education. We have to think about media and information literacy as cross-curricular competence, but also we should try to put back the values in our lives. When I say values, I'm not thinking about some kind of rigid idea of, you know, values of traditionalism or whatever, but the values of decency, of politeness, of being nice to others, of the values of argument rather than harsh words. You know, I mean, the old saying says that once you have an argument, you don't have to be very loud to present it. And this is exactly the case. We should teach young people not to be loud, but to be argumentative, and that's how democracy works. Comparing the arguments, discussing the arguments, and finding the best solution for the society. That's of course we do it, but the thing is that both in educational system and in societies, it's not, I would say, done very strategically, and it more depends on the individual enthusiasm of specific teachers or you know, heads of schools and universities, rather than systematic strategic planning of societies. And that's something we should work more on, to develop strategies rather than just do it every now and then just because someone thought it should be done, or there is a project that's behind the idea.
Thank you. And my last question would be, can we teach adults? And how can we do that?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole idea of media and information literacy is actually closely related to the idea of lifelong learning. So we can teach adults as well. It's not that once you achieve certain age, you should stop learning. It's totally the opposite, especially when it comes to these societal issues. Well, I mean, the easiest way to explain how things change is basically our parents or grandparents have never used for example, Skype or Zoom as a platform before, and then at some certain older age, they learned how to do it technically. So why shouldn't they learn how to do it by essence? I mean, it's impossible to be able to learn certain things and not be able to learn other things. I think that as a human beings, our privilege, so to say, as humans, is that we have a ability to learn, and it's a lifelong ability, and we should use it as such. So yeah, we should and we can teach adults, and it has to be strategic as well, but also we have to discuss with adults how they see their role in the whole process. And we, as much as we can learn from adults, we can learn from young people as well, and that's why this is a process, not a very quick, finding a quick and easy solution to the issue.
And this conversation of ours, I would believe, and I hope, is one way to do it. Thank you, Professor Turčilo, so much for this inspiring and motivating conversation. It was a pleasure to have you with us at our Integrity Talks. Many thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The pleasure is all mine. And I think that we achieved our goal today if we managed to make our audience to think about these issues and continuously asking themselves, what can I do differently? What can I do to prevent all these things that are happening? How can I contribute to decent and nice communication? Because I strongly believe that we all can do that. And the only thing we need is a bit of a goodwill. And I think, and I'm sure that we all can find it in ourselves.
Thank you.